The bride stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Bowie, Arizona Territory, her calico dress rumpled from 3 weeks of travel, and knew immediately something had gone terribly wrong when she saw the man waiting at the chapel steps turn ghost white before spinning on his heel and disappearing into the saloon across the dusty street. Catherine Oakes stood frozen in the September heat of 1873, her carpetbag clutched in both hands, watching the coward who had promised to marry her vanish like smoke. The stage driver cleared his throat awkwardly behind her, and she realized she was blocking the way for the other passengers. She moved aside mechanically, her mind racing through the carefully worded letters she had received over the past 6 months from Harold Finch, letters that had painted him as an honest rancher seeking a wife to share his life in the Arizona Territory. He had sent money for her passage from Philadelphia. He had promised her a home, security, a future. He had not promised to actually go through with the wedding. Miss Oakes, a thin man in a black suit, approached, his face apologetic but not particularly sympathetic. "I am Reverend Crane. Mr. Finch asked me to convey his regrets." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. His regrets. He finds himself unable to proceed with the marriage. The Reverend's words were clipped, professional, delivered with the practiced ease of a man who had said difficult things before. "He has arranged for your return passage on tomorrow's stage." Unable to proceed, Catherine's voice came out stronger than she felt. "What does that mean? We had an agreement. I traveled 2,000 miles based on his word." The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. Several townspeople had stopped to watch, and Catherine could feel their eyes on her like physical weights. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered something to her companion. 2 men outside the general store were openly staring. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside the chapel," the Reverend suggested. "No." Catherine straightened her spine, years of her mother's lessons about proper posture suddenly useful. "I would like to hear the explanation right here. If I am to be humiliated, at least let everyone witness the injustice of it." The Reverend's jaw tightened. "Miss Oakes, Mr. Finch discovered that you withheld certain information in your letters. He feels deceived." "What information could I possibly have withheld?" Catherine demanded. "I told him everything about myself, my education, my family situation, my age, my skills. What exactly did I hide?" "Your appearance," the Reverend said quietly. The words hit Catherine like a slap. "My appearance." Mr. Finch expected someone more conventionally attractive. "He feels that your letters misrepresented what you looked like." Catherine had known she was not a great beauty. Her features were too strong, her jaw too square, her nose too prominent, but she had never claimed otherwise in her correspondence. She had described herself honestly as healthy and sturdy, which she was. She had sent no photograph because she could not afford one, and Harold had never requested it. The assumption that she would be pretty had been entirely his own invention. "I see." Catherine's voice was ice over fire. "So I am to be cast aside because I am not pretty enough for him. Miss Oakes, please understand. I understand perfectly." Catherine looked around at the gathered crowd, her cheeks burning but her voice steady. "A man of Fort Bowie has proven himself a liar and a coward. He made promises he had no intention of keeping. He brought a woman 2,000 miles from her home and then refused to honor his commitment because she does not please his eye. I understand exactly what kind of man Harold Finch is, and exactly what kind of town would allow him to do this without consequence." The Reverend's face reddened. "Now see here. I will stand with her." The voice came from the back of the small crowd that had gathered. Catherine turned to see a man stepping forward from where he had been leaning against a post outside the chapel. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that touched his collar. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, and there was dried mud on his sleeves as though he had been working with cattle. His eyes, a startling gray-green in his tanned face, were fixed on Catherine with an expression she could not quite read. "Excuse me," the Reverend said. "I said I will stand with her." The man moved closer, his gait easy despite the tension in the air. "If Miss Oakes needs a husband today, I will marry her, right now if she is willing." Catherine stared at him, her mind refusing to process what she was hearing. "I do not even know you." "Name is Ethan Truly. I run a small ranch about 5 miles east of town." He looked at her directly, and there was something solid and real in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I know you do not know me, and I am not saying this is how anyone would want to start a marriage. But you came here in good faith, and you deserve better than what Finch just did to you. If you need a husband, I am offering. If you would rather take tomorrow's stage back to wherever you came from, I will pay for a room at the hotel tonight so you have a decent place to stay. Either way, you should not have to stand here and be treated like this." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was insane. She had spent 6 months exchanging letters with Harold Finch, learning about his life, sharing details of her own. She had prepared herself mentally and emotionally to become his wife. And now this stranger was proposing marriage to her in the middle of the street, in front of half the town, out of what appeared to be pure gallantry or perhaps pity. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Ethan Truly was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. "My mother was a mail-order bride. She came west to marry a man who turned out to be nothing like his letters. He was cruel and he drank, and she was trapped with him for years until he finally drank himself to death. She used to tell me that someone should have stepped up on her wedding day, should have given her a way out. Nobody did. So I guess I am doing for you what nobody did for her." The honesty in his words struck something deep in Catherine's chest. This was not pity. This was principle. "You would marry a complete stranger out of principle?" she asked. "I would." His voice was steady. "But I want you to know what you would be getting. I have a small ranch that does decent but not spectacular. I work hard. I am honest. I do not drink to excess, and I have never raised my hand to a woman. I have no family left in these parts. I can offer you a home and respect, but I cannot promise anything beyond that right now. If you want time to get to know each other first, we can take that time. But if you need a husband today so you do not have to go back east in shame, I am willing to be that husband." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him. He had a scar along his jaw, old and faded. His hands were work-roughened, the hands of someone who labored with them every day. There was no guile in his face, no calculation, just a quiet steadiness that made her want to trust him despite every logical reason not to. She thought about returning to Philadelphia on tomorrow's stage. Returning to the boarding house where she had spent the last 3 years working as a seamstress, barely scraping by after her father's death. Returning to the pitying looks and whispered gossip, when everyone learned she had been rejected before even reaching the altar. Returning to the grinding poverty and the knowledge that at 24, her chances of making a decent marriage back east were virtually non-existent. Or she could take a chance on this stranger, who was offering her exactly what she had come west to find. "If I agree," Catherine said slowly, "I want to be clear about something. I will be a true wife. I will keep your home and cook your meals and work beside you. I will honor our vows, but I will not tolerate cruelty or dishonesty. If you prove to be a bad man, I will leave, regardless of what the law or society says about it." "Fair enough," Ethan said. "And if you find you cannot bear being married to me, I will not hold you against your will. I am not looking to imprison anyone." Catherine took a deep breath. This was absolutely mad, but madness seemed better than the alternative. "Then yes," she said, "I will marry you, Ethan, truly." A ripple went through the crowd. The Reverend looked stunned. "Now wait just a moment. You have a chapel and a wedding dress waiting inside," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "The lady came here to get married, and that is what is going to happen. Unless you want to explain to your congregation why you refuse to marry two willing people." Reverend Crane opened and closed his mouth twice, looking between Ethan and Catherine and the gathered crowd. Finally, he sighed. "Very well. If you are both certain about this rash decision, I will perform the ceremony. But let it be noted that I advised against it." "Noted," Ethan said dryly. They walked into the chapel together, Catherine carrying her carpet bag because she had nowhere else to put it. The interior was simple, just wooden pews and a plain altar, but someone had put wildflowers in jars along the windowsills. They had been meant for her wedding to Harold. The thought made Catherine's jaw tighten. "You need a moment to compose yourself," Ethan asked quietly as the Reverend went to fetch his book. "No." Catherine set down her bag and turned to face him. "If we are doing this, let us do it now before either of us comes to our senses." The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. "Fair enough." The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. Reverend Crane rushed through the words as though he wanted to be done with the whole business. Catherine spoke her vows in a clear voice, looking directly at Ethan as she did so. His responses were equally steady. When the Reverend instructed them to join hands, Ethan's palm was warm and calloused against hers. When he was told he could kiss his bride, he hesitated. "May I?" he asked quietly, and Catherine appreciated that he asked. "Yes." He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, a brief and chaste kiss that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through her. His lips were dry from the desert air, and he smelled of horses and dust and something else, something clean and masculine. The kiss lasted only a moment before he pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Are you all right?" he murmured. Catherine realized she was trembling. "I just married a man I met 15 minutes ago." "You did?" His hand was still holding hers, steady and solid. "And I promise I am going to do everything I can to make sure you do not regret it." They signed the papers. Reverend Crane witnessed them with visible reluctance. And just like that, Catherine Oakes became Catherine truly, wife to a man she knew almost nothing about. When they emerged from the chapel, the crowd had grown. Catherine saw curious faces, skeptical faces, a few that looked almost sympathetic. And there, outside the saloon, she saw Harold Finch watching with an expression of disbelief and something that might have been regret. She lifted her chin and walked past him without a word, her hand tucked into the crook of Ethan's arm. "I have a wagon around the side," Ethan said. "It is not much, but it will get us home." Home. The word felt foreign and strange. Catherine followed him to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 horses. He helped her up onto the seat with easy courtesy, then loaded her carpet bag in the back. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Catherine felt the full weight of what she had just done settle over her. She was married, to a stranger. She was about to go to his ranch, a place she had never seen, to begin a life she had not prepared for with a man she did not know. Ethan glanced at her as he guided the horses out of town. "You are very quiet, I am thinking. About how insane this is." Despite everything, Catherine felt a small laugh escape her. "Yes, actually. It is insane," Ethan agreed. "But sometimes life does not give you sensible choices. You take the best option available and try to make it work." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon rumbling along the dusty road that led east from Fort Bowie. The land stretched out around them, vast and empty and beautiful in a harsh way Catherine was not used to. Mountains rose in the distance, purple-blue against the bright sky. Scrub, brush, and cacti dotted the sandy earth. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like the green, rolling hills of her childhood in Pennsylvania. "Tell me about your ranch," Catherine said finally, needing to fill the silence with something. "It is small, like I said. About 100 acres, though only part of it is good grazing. I run cattle and a few horses. I have been building it up for the past 5 years since I saved enough to buy the land. It is hard work, but it is mine." He paused. "The house is nothing fancy. 2 rooms right now, though I have been planning to add on. I built it myself, so it is sturdy but plain. 2 rooms, the main room and a bedroom. There is a stove for cooking and heating, a well just outside, a barn for the animals, and a chicken coop." He glanced at her again. "I know it is not much, especially for someone coming from a city." "I was not living in luxury in Philadelphia," Catherine said honestly. "I had 1 room in a boarding house and worked 14 hours a day sewing in a factory. 2 rooms in my own home sounds quite generous, actually." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Your letters to Finch mentioned your father died 3 years ago. He was a school teacher. When he passed, I had no family left and no means of supporting myself beyond what I could earn with a needle, hence the mail-order bride advertisement." Catherine kept her voice matter-of-fact, though the memory still stung. "I was never beautiful enough to attract a husband in the normal way. The advertisement seemed like my best option." "Harold Finch is a fool," Ethan said bluntly. Catherine blinked in surprise. "Pardon, he is a fool. Any man who would judge a wife based only on her face is missing the point entirely." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "A pretty face does not cook meals or run a household or stand by you when times are hard. Character matters. Strength matters. From what I saw today, you have both." Catherine felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. "You do not know that. You only saw me for a few minutes. I saw you stand up in front of a crowd and refuse to be cowed. I saw you make a difficult choice with grace under pressure. That tells me something about who you are." He paused. "And I saw you agree to marry a stranger to avoid going back to a life you did not want, which tells me you are brave and a bit reckless. I can respect that. Brave and reckless might also mean foolish. Maybe. But maybe it means you are a survivor. Time will tell." They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable silence now. Catherine studied Ethan from the corner of her eye. He sat relaxed on the wagon seat, hands easy on the reins, clearly comfortable in his body and his place in this landscape. He was probably close to her age, maybe a year or 2 older. His profile was strong, all clean lines and angles. He was not handsome in a classical sense, but there was something appealing about him nonetheless, something solid and real. "What about you?" she asked. "Why were you not already married? You seem like the kind of man women would find acceptable." Ethan's mouth quirked. "I have been too busy building the ranch, and the women in Fort Bowie are mostly already spoken for. The few who are not have made it clear I am not interesting enough for them. I work too hard, I have too little money, and I do not waste time on courtship dances." He shrugged. "I always figured I would get around to marriage eventually, just did not expect it to happen quite like this." "Why were you at the chapel today?" Catherine asked suddenly. "You said you were in the back pew. Were you there for the wedding?" A slight flush colored Ethan's neck. "I had business in town and I saw the commotion when your stage arrived. I watched Finch run off and I guess I was curious what would happen. I went into the chapel to hear what would be said. When that reverend told you that you were being rejected for your looks, something in me just snapped. I was not planning to propose. The words just came out. And now here we are." "And now here we are," he agreed. "Married." Catherine absorbed that. She was married. To this man beside her. Tonight she would share a house with him. Share a room, share a bed. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through her stomach. She barely knew him. She had no idea what kind of husband he would be, what he would expect from her. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan cleared his throat. About tonight, I want you to know that I have no expectations. We can take time to get used to each other. The bed is yours. I can sleep on the floor or in the barn if that makes you more comfortable. Catherine considered that. Part of her wanted to take him up on the offer, to have time to adjust to this sudden change in her circumstances. But another part of her knew that putting off the inevitable would only make it harder. "We are married," she said quietly. "I meant what I said in the chapel. I intend to be a true wife, unless you would prefer to wait." Ethan's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. "I would not prefer to wait, but I want you to be sure. I do not want you to feel obligated. I am as sure as I can be, given the circumstances." He nodded slowly. "Then we will figure it out together." The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when they finally turned off the main road onto a smaller track that wound through rocky terrain. After another mile, Catherine saw buildings appear ahead. A house, small but well built, with a covered porch. A barn, good-sized and sturdy-looking. A chicken coop, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a vegetable garden struggling against the dry soil. "This is it," Ethan said, a note of pride in his voice. "The Truly Ranch." Catherine studied it with interest. It was modest, certainly, but it looked well maintained. The house needed paint and the garden needed work, but the structures were solid. There were no broken fences, no sagging roofs. This was a place that was cared for. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. He climbed down and came around to help Catherine descend, his hands firm on her waist as he lifted her down. For a moment they stood very close, and Catherine could see flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes. "Welcome home," he said softly. "Home." Catherine turned to look at the house that was now hers. It was more than she had thought she would ever have again. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Ethan showed her inside. The main room was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, a wood stove for cooking, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair by the fireplace. Shelves held dishes and supplies. A braided rug covered part of the wooden floor. It was clean and neat, the home of someone who took care of his possessions. "The bedroom is through there." Ethan indicated a door on the far wall. "There is a pump outside for water and an outhouse about 30 yards back. I know it is not fancy, Ethan." Catherine turned to face him. "It is a good home. You should be proud of what you have built here." He looked relieved. "I will bring in your bag and then tend to the horses. After that I can make us some supper. I am not a great cook, but I manage." "I can cook," Catherine said, "if you will show me where things are." They worked together in the kitchen area, Ethan showing her how the stove worked, where he kept supplies, how the water pump operated. Catherine was acutely aware of him beside her, the way he moved in the space, the sound of his voice. This man was her husband. The reality of it kept hitting her in waves. She made a simple meal of beans and cornbread with the supplies she found. They ate at the table as the light outside faded to dusk. Ethan told her about the ranch, about the cattle that were scattered across the grazing land, about his plans to expand. Catherine told him more about her life in Philadelphia, about her father and the boarding house and the factory work. They were strangers learning each other, careful and polite, dancing around the enormous thing they had done. After supper, Ethan went out to do final checks on the animals. Catherine cleaned the dishes and explored the house more thoroughly. The bedroom was small but adequate, with a bed frame Ethan had clearly built himself, a wardrobe and a washstand. The bed had clean linens and a quilt. The room smelled faintly of cedar. When Ethan returned, full darkness had fallen. He lit a lamp and they stood awkwardly in the main room, both aware that the evening was progressing toward bedtime. "Would you like to wash up first?" Ethan asked. "I can heat some water for you." Catherine nodded gratefully. He heated a kettle and brought it to the bedroom with a basin. "I will give you privacy," he said, and closed the door. Catherine washed quickly in the warm water, then changed into her nightgown, one of the few good items she still owned. It was modest but pretty white cotton with lace at the collar. She brushed out her dark brown hair and braided it loosely. Her hands were shaking slightly. When she opened the door, Ethan was sitting at the table, mending a piece of tack by lamplight. He looked up when she appeared, and something flickered in his eyes before he banked it. "Your turn," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded and went past her into the bedroom. Catherine sat in the rocking chair and tried to calm her racing heart. She was not a complete innocent. She understood the basics of what happened between a husband and wife. But understanding theoretically and actually experiencing it were very different things. When Ethan emerged, he had washed and changed into clean trousers and a shirt. His hair was damp. He looked at Catherine and there was a question in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "We do not have to do anything tonight, we can just sleep." Catherine stood up. Her legs felt unsteady. "I am nervous," she admitted, "but I am sure we are married. I want this to be a real marriage." Ethan crossed to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When he reached her, he took her hand gently. "Then we will take this slow," he said. "And if at any point you want to stop, you just say so. All right, all right." He led her into the bedroom. The lamp cast soft shadows across the walls. Ethan closed the door and turned to face her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then he reached up and gently cupped her face with one hand. "You are not what Harold Finch expected," he said quietly. "But I think you are exactly what I needed." Catherine's breath caught. "You barely know me. I know enough." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I know you are brave and honest and strong. The rest we will learn." He kissed her then, gently at first, just a soft press of lips. Catherine's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened slowly, Ethan's other hand coming up to cradle her head, his fingers threading through her hair. Catherine felt heat building in her core, a warmth that spread through her whole body. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing harder. Ethan's eyes were dark in the lamplight. "Still sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes." What followed was tender and careful. Ethan was patient, attentive to her reactions, pausing whenever she tensed. There was some pain, but less than Catherine had feared, and it was wrapped in warmth and surprising pleasure. Ethan whispered encouragement against her skin, telling her she was beautiful, that she was doing well, that he would take care of her. And afterward, when they lay tangled together in the darkness, Catherine felt something shift inside her. This was her husband. This was her home. Against all odds, she had found a place to belong. "Catherine," Ethan's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, thank you for taking a chance on me." Catherine turned her head to look at him, barely able to make out his features in the dark. "Thank you for standing up for me." He pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. Catherine rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert night. Inside, Catherine truly fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling safer than she had in years. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and learning. Catherine threw herself into making the house a proper home, sewing curtains from fabric Ethan bought for her in town, organizing the storage, tending the scraggly vegetable garden. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to pump water efficiently, to gather eggs from chickens that seemed to view her with deep suspicion. Ethan taught her to ride, patiently guiding her on a gentle mare until she could sit a horse without clutching the saddle in terror. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Ethan rose before dawn and worked until dusk, coming in exhausted and hungry. Catherine had meals ready, clothes mended, the house tidy. At night they ate together and talked about their days, sharing the small details that built intimacy. And when they went to bed, there was growing warmth between them, the awkwardness fading into something more natural and heated. Catherine found herself watching Ethan as he worked, admiring the easy strength of his body, the competence of his hands. He was kind to the animals, patient with broken equipment, steady in the face of setbacks. He never raised his voice to her, never criticized harshly. When she burned supper one night, he simply ate what was salvageable and told her everyone made mistakes. When she accidentally left the chicken coop open and had to chase escaped hens for an hour, he helped her round them up and then fixed the latch so it would not happen again. They went into Fort Bowie together after 3 weeks, needing supplies. Catherine was nervous about facing the town again, but Ethan's solid presence beside her helped. People stared, of course. The story of their hasty marriage had spread. But Ethan ignored the looks and treated her with such obvious respect and care that Catherine found herself holding her head high. In the general store, they ran into Harold Finch. The man looked uncomfortable, his face flushing when he saw them. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Ethan simply guided Catherine past him with a hand on the small of her back, not even acknowledging his presence. Catherine felt a surge of satisfaction. She had traded up considerably, and Finch knew it. Outside, as Ethan loaded supplies into the wagon, a woman approached. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and a kind face. "Mrs. Truly," she said, "I am Martha Reynolds. I own the boarding house in town." Catherine tensed, unsure what to expect. "Hello. I wanted to tell you that what happened to you was shameful, and I am glad you found a good man to marry instead." Martha glanced at Ethan, who had paused in his work to listen. "Ethan truly is one of the most decent men in this territory. You could have done far worse." "Thank you," Catherine said, surprised and touched. "If you ever need anything or just want company, my door is always open. It can be lonely out on a ranch, and us women need to stick together." Catherine smiled. "I would like that." Martha patted her arm and moved on. Ethan climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Catherine. "That was kind of her," Catherine said. "Martha is good people. She runs the boarding house and also helps out when folks are sick or need assistance. If she has taken a liking to you, you will have a friend in town." "Have you had many friends?" Catherine asked as they started back toward the ranch. Ethan shrugged. "A few. I keep to myself mostly. The ranch takes up most of my time. But there are good people around Fort Bowie, even if there are a few bad ones like Finch." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Catherine said, "I have been thinking about the garden." "What about it?" "It needs more work than I can give it alone, and I am not sure what grows well here. I am used to Pennsylvania gardens. The climate here is so different." She hesitated. "I thought maybe I could ask Martha or some of the other women for advice, and maybe you could help me expand it. If we are going to stay self-sufficient, we should grow more of our own food." "That is a good idea," Ethan said. "I can help with the heavy work, digging and fencing, and Martha would know what grows well in this soil." Catherine felt a warm glow. He was taking her seriously, valuing her input. In the few relationships she had observed back east, men often dismissed their wives' ideas or made decisions without consultation. Ethan treated her as a partner. As fall deepened, the work on the ranch intensified. Ethan needed to move the cattle to better grazing, repair fences before winter, stock up on feed and supplies. Catherine helped where she could, learning to brand cattle with a running iron, to mend tack, to doctor minor animal ailments. Her hands grew calloused and her skin browned from the sun despite her bonnet. One evening in late October, as they were finishing supper, Ethan set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "What is it?" "The ranch is doing well, better than I expected this year. I have enough saved now to start adding onto the house, building that extra room I mentioned. Maybe 2 extra rooms if we are careful." He paused. "I wanted to ask what you would want in an addition. What would make this place feel more like a real home to you?" Catherine stared at him. "You are asking me. Of course I am asking you. This is your home too. You should have a say in how it is built." Catherine felt emotion well up in her throat. "I would like a proper kitchen, separate from the main living area, and maybe a room for guests or for—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "For children," Ethan said gently, "eventually. Perhaps." Catherine felt her face heat. They had not talked about children yet. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "I would like that too. Eventually. When you are ready." That night, lying in the darkness after making love, Catherine found herself thinking about the future in a way she had not allowed herself to before. She could picture children playing in the yard, picture herself and Ethan growing old together on this ranch, picture a life that was hard but full of meaning. "Ethan," she whispered. I think I am falling in love with you." She felt him go still beside her. Then he rolled over to face her, his hand cupping her cheek in the darkness. "I know I am falling in love with you," he said. "I have been for weeks. I just did not know if you felt the same." "How could I not?" Catherine's voice caught. "You are everything I hoped Harold Finch would be and more. You are kind and honorable and hard-working. You treat me with respect. You make me feel valued and safe. How could I not fall in love with you?" Ethan kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Catherine felt her heart overflow. What had started as a desperate bargain in front of a chapel had become something real and precious. She had found not just a husband, but a true partner and companion. Winter came to the Arizona territory with cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the mountains. Ethan worked on the addition to the house whenever weather permitted, and Catherine helped, holding boards and mixing mortar and learning carpentry alongside him. They worked in companionable silence, or talked about their plans for the ranch, or simply enjoyed being near each other. In December, Catherine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Ethan over breakfast one morning, "I think I am with child." Ethan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. My courses are late and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings." Ethan set down his cup slowly, his face transforming with wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you pleased?" Catherine asked, suddenly anxious. "I know we have only been married a few months." "It is sooner than we planned." Ethan was out of his chair and around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms. "I am thrilled. Catherine, I am thrilled. Are you pleased?" Catherine laughed, relief flooding through her. "Yes, I am surprised, but yes, I am pleased." He kissed her soundly, then pulled back. "You should not be doing heavy work anymore. No more helping with the addition. You need to rest to take care of yourself." "I am pregnant, not ill. I can still work. Within reason. But I am not having you lift heavy boards or climb ladders. Not while you are carrying our child." Catherine might have argued, but the fierce protectiveness in his eyes stopped her. He was worried for her safety, for the baby's safety. She could not fault him for that. The pregnancy progressed through winter and into spring. Catherine suffered through morning sickness and exhaustion, but Ethan was endlessly patient, bringing her dry crackers in bed, taking over tasks she found overwhelming, never complaining when she fell asleep immediately after supper. The addition to the house was completed in March, giving them a proper kitchen, a guest room that would become a nursery, and more storage space. In April, Martha Reynolds came out to the ranch to visit and brought two other women from town, Sarah Coleman and Ruth Martinez. They came bearing gifts for the baby, tiny clothes and blankets they had sewn. Catherine was touched nearly to tears. "We take care of our own here," Martha said firmly. "You are one of us now, Catherine, truly. When your time comes, we will be here to help." Catherine discovered that Fort Bowie had a community of women who supported each other through the challenges of frontier life. They shared recipes and advice, helped with difficult tasks, attended each other's births and illnesses. She was welcomed into this circle with genuine warmth, her humiliation at the hands of Harold Finch apparently forgiven or forgotten. She also learned that she was not the only one who had benefited from Ethan's character. Sarah Coleman mentioned that Ethan had helped her husband repair their barn after a storm, refusing payment. Ruth Martinez said he had given them a cow when their milk cow died and they could not afford another. He was respected in the community, known as someone who could be counted on. "You married a good man," Sarah told Catherine, "even if it happened in a strange way." "I know," Catherine said softly, resting a hand on her swelling belly. "Believe me, I know. The baby came in late June in the heat of summer. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through a day and a night." Martha and Ruth attended Catherine, while Ethan paced outside like a caged animal. Catherine could hear him through the walls, his boots on the porch boards, his occasional anxious questions that Martha answered with brisk reassurance. When the baby finally arrived in the gray light of dawn, Catherine was exhausted beyond measure, but when Martha placed the squalling infant in her arms, everything else faded away. "A boy," Martha announced. "A fine, healthy boy." Ethan was allowed in then, and Catherine watched his face as he saw his son for the first time. Wonder and love and fierce pride all mixed together, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. "He is perfect," Ethan breathed, touching one tiny fist with a gentle finger. "You did so well, Catherine." So well. They named him James, after Catherine's father. James Truly, born in June of 1874 on a small ranch in the Arizona Territory. He was red-faced and loud, and the most beautiful thing Catherine had ever seen. The first months with a newborn were exhausting in ways Catherine had not anticipated. James needed constant attention, feeding every few hours day and night. Catherine was sore and tired and overwhelmed, but Ethan stepped up in ways that surprised her. He walked the floor with James when Catherine needed sleep. He changed diapers without complaint. He took over all the outdoor chores and most of the cooking, letting Catherine focus on healing and caring for their son. "You are a natural father," Catherine told him one evening as she watched him rock James to sleep. "I am just doing what needs to be done," Ethan said, but he looked pleased. Not all men would be so involved. Most men think babies are women's work. "Most men are fools," Ethan said simply. "This is my son. Why would I not want to care for him?" Catherine felt her love for him deepen even further. She had been lucky, she realized. So incredibly lucky. What could have been a disaster had instead given her the family she had always wanted. James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby, then a curious toddler. The ranch prospered. Ethan expanded his herd and bought more land. Catherine's garden flourished, and she learned to preserve food for the winter. They saved money slowly but steadily, planning for the future. When James was 2 years old, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1877, she delivered a healthy daughter they named Alina after Ethan's mother. Life settled into a rhythm. The work was hard but satisfying. Catherine ran the household and managed the garden and chickens while caring for two small children. Ethan worked the ranch and made improvements and dealt with the various crises that arose. They faced dry years and good years, sick cattle and healthy ones, lean times and prosperous ones. Through it all, they faced things together, partners in every sense of the word. On a warm evening in September of 1878, 5 years after Catherine had stepped off the stage in Fort Bowie, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James was chasing chickens while Alina toddled after him on unsteady legs, laughing at her brother's antics. "You ever think about that day?" Catherine asked. "The day we married?" "Sometimes," Ethan said. "I think about how close I came to not saying anything, to just letting you leave on that stage." "What made you speak up?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I looked at you standing there in the street, refusing to be ashamed even though Finch had humiliated you, and I thought you were magnificent. You had this fire in you, this strength. And I just thought that any man who could not see that was an idiot. I wanted you to have a chance at the life you deserved." Catherine reached over and took his hand. "You gave me more than a chance. You gave me everything. A home, children, a true partnership. I am happier than I ever thought I would be." "So am I." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Marrying you was the best impulsive decision I ever made." Catherine laughed. "It was insane. It was perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold as it sank toward the horizon. James caught Alina and spun her around, making her shriek with delight. The sound of their children's laughter floated across the yard, sweet and clear. "I love you, Catherine, truly," Ethan said softly. "I love you too, Ethan, truly," Catherine replied. She thought back to the frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 5 years ago, not knowing what awaited her. She thought about Harold Finch and the humiliation she had endured. And she thought about the tall, quiet cowboy who had stood up from a back pew and offered her salvation without expecting anything in return. She had come west as a mail-order bride and been rejected at the altar. But in that moment of complete despair, when she had thought all hope was lost, a good man had stepped forward and changed her life forever. Some people might say their marriage was founded on a shaky beginning, that marrying a stranger was reckless and foolish. But Catherine knew better. The best things in her life had come from that single moment of courage when Ethan had said, "I will stand with her." He had stood with her then. And every day since, through hardship and joy, through struggle and triumph, he had continued to stand with her. They had built a life together from nothing, forged a love that was stronger for having been tested. As darkness fell and they ushered their children inside for supper, Catherine looked around at her home, her family, her life, and felt grateful beyond measure. She had come west looking for security and a place to belong. She had found love instead, and it was more than she ever could have imagined. The years continued to pass, each one adding its own threads to the tapestry of their life together. By 1880, the Truly Ranch had grown substantially. Ethan had been able to buy an adjoining property when the owner decided to move back east, nearly doubling their land. The herd of cattle had increased to the point where they needed to hire seasonal help during roundup and branding. The house now had 4 rooms, and Catherine had planted cottonwoods around it that were starting to provide shade. James, at 6 years old, was already showing signs of following in his father's footsteps. He trailed after Ethan constantly, wanting to help with every task, asking endless questions about ranching and cattle and horses. Ethan was patient with him, teaching him to ride properly, to rope, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. Alina, at 3, was her mother's shadow. She followed Catherine everywhere, helping gather eggs even though she was still a bit afraid of the roosters, trying to help with cooking even when she made more mess than she prevented. She had Catherine's dark hair and Ethan's gray-green eyes, and her laugh was the sweetest sound in Catherine's world. In the spring of 1881, Catherine gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. This pregnancy and delivery were the easiest yet, and Catherine recovered quickly. Ethan joked that they were going to need to add on to the house again if they kept expanding the family. "Would you mind," Catherine asked, nursing baby Thomas while watching James and Alina play on the floor. "Mind having more children?" "No, I would not mind at all," Ethan said. He was sitting nearby, mending a bridle. "As long as you are healthy and willing, I am happy to have as many children as God sees fit to give us." "I want at least one more," Catherine admitted. "Maybe two. I never had siblings, and I always wished I had. I want our children to have each other." "Then we will have more," Ethan said simply. "I love you, Catherine. I love the family we have built. Whatever comes, we will handle it together." Fort Bowie had grown along with their ranch. The town now had a proper school, a new church building, a second general store, and even a small hotel. The territory was becoming more settled, less wild. The Apache conflicts that had troubled the area were largely resolved, though tensions still flared occasionally. The railroad was talking about extending a line through the region, which would make shipping cattle much easier. Catherine had become an integral part of the town's community. She was known for her excellent garden produce, which she sold or traded in town. She helped organize social events at the church. She sewed clothes for families who could not afford store-bought items. She had become friends with many of the women, particularly Martha Reynolds, who had become like a mother to her. One day in the fall of 1881, Catherine was in town with James and Alina, buying supplies, when she saw Harold Finch coming out of the saloon. She had not seen him in months and was startled by how poorly he looked. He was thinner than she remembered, his face lined and haggard. He saw her and stopped, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Mrs. Truly," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Mr. Finch." Catherine kept her voice cool and polite. He looked at James and Alina, who were examining peppermint sticks in the general store window. "Your children?" "Yes, James and Alina. I have a baby at home as well, Thomas." Something that might have been regret crossed Finch's face. "You have done well for yourself." "I have. Ethan is a good husband and a good father." Catherine paused, then decided to be kind. "I hope you are well, Mr. Finch. I am getting by." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Truly, I owe you an apology. What I did to you that day was wrong." "I was a coward and a fool." Catherine was surprised by the admission. "Yes, you were. For what it is worth, I am sorry. You deserved better treatment." "I received better treatment, just not from you." Catherine gathered her children. "Good day, Mr. Finch." As she walked away, she felt Ethan's presence beside her. He must have finished loading the wagon and come looking for them. He put a hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, he apologized, actually." "Did he?" Ethan glanced back at Finch, who was walking away in the opposite direction. "Better late than never, I suppose." "It does not matter anymore," Catherine said honestly. "He is nothing to me, less than nothing. What he did led me to you, and I would not change that for anything in the world." Ethan smiled and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head despite the fact that they were standing in the middle of Main Street. Catherine did not care who saw. Let them look. She was proud to be Ethan Truly's wife. The years continued to spin out, each one bringing changes and challenges. In 1883, Catherine gave birth to twin daughters, Alice and Anna. The twins were a handful, keeping Catherine constantly busy. Ethan hired a young man named Daniel to help with the ranch work full-time, as he could no longer manage everything alone with 5 young children underfoot. James, at 9, was becoming genuinely useful around the ranch. He could handle many of the daily chores without supervision. Eleanor, at 6, started attending the school in Fort Bowie. Thomas was a wild 3-year-old, constantly getting into mischief. And the twins were still babies, requiring constant attention. Catherine sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work required to keep the household running. But Ethan remained her steady partner, helping whenever he could, taking children off her hands when she needed a break, never complaining about the chaos their life had become. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life," Catherine told Martha one day when she had brought the children to town for a church social. "What do you mean?" Martha was holding one of the twins while Catherine managed the other 4 children. "I just mean that 10 years ago, I was alone in Philadelphia with no prospects and no future. And now I have this huge family and this busy life, and sometimes I look around and wonder how I got here." Martha smiled. "You got here by being brave enough to take a chance. And by being smart enough to see that Ethan truly was worth taking a chance on." "He was the one who took the chance," Catherine protested. "He married a complete stranger." "You both took chances," Martha said firmly, "and you both worked hard to make those chances pay off. That is what makes a good marriage. Not luck, but effort." Catherine thought about that as she watched her children play with the other town children. She and Ethan had put in the effort day after day, year after year. They had learned each other, supported each other, built a life brick by brick. The romance that had bloomed between them had grown deeper and richer with time, tempered by the realities of daily life but never diminished. In the evenings, after the children were finally in bed, she and Ethan would sit together on the porch, exhausted but content. Sometimes they talked about the day's events. Sometimes they made plans for the future. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "You ever regret it?" Catherine asked one night. "Marrying me that day?" "Never." Ethan's answer was immediate and firm. "Best decision I ever made. Why, do you regret it?" "Not even for a moment." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I just wanted to make sure you were as happy as I am." "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Ethan said. He pulled her closer. "I love you, Catherine. I loved you when I married you, even though I barely knew you, and I love you more now, knowing everything about you than I thought possible." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, so much." They sat together as the night deepened around them, 2 people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other. The house behind them held their children, their future. The land around them was theirs, built through hard work and determination. They had created something lasting and real from nothing but hope and courage. As 1885 dawned, bringing with it new challenges and new blessings, Catherine truly looked at her life with deep satisfaction. She had 5 healthy children, a husband who loved and respected her, a home she had helped build, and a community where she belonged. She had friends and purpose and joy. She thought sometimes about that desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Bowie 12 years ago, expecting to marry a man named Harold Finch. That woman had been so frightened, so uncertain of her future. She could never have imagined the life that awaited her, the love that would find her in the most unexpected way. Catherine had been refused at the chapel, rejected for not being pretty enough. But a cowboy in the back pew had stood up and said he would stand with her. And that simple act of courage and kindness had changed everything. Ethan had stood with her that day. And in all the days since, through every challenge and every triumph, he had never stopped standing with her. They had faced life together, built a future together, created a family together. and they would continue to face whatever came next together, side by side, partners in every way that mattered. As Catherine went about her daily work, caring for her children, tending her garden, managing her household, she carried with her the knowledge that she was loved and valued. Not for her appearance, not for what she could provide, but for who she was as a person. Ethan saw her truly in all her strengths and weaknesses and loved her anyway. That spring, as she worked in the garden with Alina and Thomas helping while the twins napped and James was out with his father checking fence lines, Catherine paused to look at the mountains rising in the distance. The land here was harsh and beautiful, demanding and rewarding. It had challenged her and shaped her, turned her from a timid city girl into a strong ranch wife. She had found her place in the world, not the place she had expected, but the place she was meant to be. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she returned to her planting, her children's voices a pleasant accompaniment to her work. Inside the house, she could hear one of the twins starting to fuss, ready to wake from her nap. Soon Ethan and James would return, hungry and tired from their work, expecting supper. There were 1,000 tasks still to do before nightfall, but Catherine found herself smiling as she worked. This was her life, full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but hers in a way nothing had ever been before. She had built this with her own hands and heart, side by side with a man who had seen her worth when others had not. She had been refused at the chapel, yes. But that refusal had led her to something far better than she could have imagined. It had led her to Ethan, to love, to a life that was hard but meaningful and rich with purpose, and she would not change a single moment of it. Years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. The children grew. James became a skilled horseman and cattle handler, working alongside his father and Daniel with increasing competence. Alina proved to have a gift for working with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse. Thomas was more interested in books than ranching, which sometimes worried Ethan until Catherine reminded him that they could afford to let their son pursue his interests, whatever they might be. The twins, Alice and Anna, were inseparable and constantly into trouble, exploring every corner of the ranch and giving Catherine new gray hairs regularly. They had Ethan's adventurous spirit and Catherine's determination, a combination that made them fearless and occasionally reckless. In 1887, Catherine gave birth to their last child, a daughter they named Rose. The pregnancy surprised them both, as Catherine was now 38 and had thought her childbearing years were behind her. But Rose arrived healthy and beautiful, with strawberry blonde hair that matched neither parent and blue eyes that would later darken to hazel. 6 children, Ethan said, holding baby Rose with practiced ease. We have created quite a family. Are you disappointed we are done? Catherine asked. She had made it clear after Rose's birth that she was too old to safely have more children. Not disappointed, grateful. Ethan looked at her with such love that Catherine felt her breath catch. You have given me 6 beautiful children and 20 years of happiness. How could I be anything but grateful? 20 years. It hardly seemed possible. Catherine was 40 when Rose was born and Ethan was 42. They were no longer the young people who had married in haste and hope. Catherine's hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the desert sun. Ethan's face was weathered and lined, his hair graying at the temples. But when Catherine looked at him, she still saw the man who had stood up in that chapel and offered her a way forward. When Ethan looked at her, he still saw the brave woman who had taken a chance on a stranger. Time and hardship had not diminished what they felt for each other. If anything, it had deepened it. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1890, the Truly Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. Ethan had built a solid reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. James, now 16, was being groomed to take over the ranch someday. Eleanor, at 13, was helping Catherine run the household with increasing capability. Fort Bowie had continued to grow as well. The railroad had finally come through in 1888, making shipping cattle and receiving supplies much easier. The town now had a telegraph office, a proper doctor, and even a small newspaper. The wild frontier was becoming civilized, and while Catherine appreciated the improvements, she sometimes missed the rawness of those early years. In the spring of 1893, 20 years after their hasty wedding, Catherine suggested they renew their vows. "We never had a proper wedding," she told Ethan. "We got married in front of a reluctant reverend with no guests and no celebration. I thought it might be nice to do it again, properly this time." Ethan looked surprised but pleased. "You want a real wedding? I want to stand up in front of our family and friends and renew the promises we made to each other. I want our children to see us commit to each other again. I want the whole town to know that what started as a desperate bargain became the greatest love of my life." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then, that is what we will do." They planned a celebration for June, coordinating with Reverend Crane, who was still the minister in Fort Bowie despite being considerably older and grayer. The man had mellowed over the years, and now spoke of Ethan and Catherine's marriage as an example of how love could bloom in unexpected places. Catherine made herself a new dress, pale blue with lace trim. Eleanor and the twins helped with the sewing. James and Thomas cleaned up the ranch until it gleamed. Daniel and several other ranch hands helped set up tables and chairs in the yard for the celebration that would follow the ceremony. On the day itself, most of Fort Bowie turned out. The church was packed with friends and neighbors, people who had watched Ethan and Catherine build their life together over 2 decades. Martha Reynolds sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. Catherine walked down the aisle on James's arm, her oldest son tall and proud beside her. At the altar, Ethan waited, looking handsome in a new suit. His eyes never left her face as she approached. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Crane began, his voice warm and rich. "We are gathered here to witness and celebrate the renewal of vows between Ethan and Catherine Truly. 20 years ago, in this very chapel, they entered into marriage under difficult circumstances. Today, they stand before us to reaffirm their commitment to each other, a commitment that has been tested and proven over 2 decades of partnership." Ethan took Catherine's hands in his. His grip was firm and familiar, calloused palms against her own work-roughened hands. "Catherine," Ethan said, his voice strong and clear. 20 years ago, I promised to stand with you. I had no idea then how much that promise would come to mean. You have been my partner, my companion, my love. You have given me a family and a home and a reason to be better than I thought I could be. I promise to continue standing with you for all the years we have left. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you until my last breath. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that I was in that back pew when you needed someone to step forward." Catherine could barely speak past the lump in her throat. "Ethan, when I stepped off that stagecoach 20 years ago, I was lost and frightened and desperate. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You have been everything I needed and so much more than I deserved. You are the kindest, strongest, most honorable man I have ever known, and being your wife has been the greatest privilege of my life. I promise to love you always, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, and to honor the life we have built together for as long as I live." There was not a dry eye in the church. Even Reverend Crane had to pause to compose himself before pronouncing them renewed in their marriage vows. When he told Ethan he could kiss his bride, Ethan pulled Catherine close and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and cheers of everyone present. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud. There was food and music and dancing. Catherine danced with Ethan, with each of her sons, with old friends. She watched her daughters laugh and play with the other children. She stood with Martha and Sarah and Ruth, and felt overwhelmed by how much love surrounded her. As evening fell and guests began to drift home, Catherine and Ethan stood together watching the sunset paint the sky. Their children were scattered around the yard, Thomas reading to Rose while the twins chased lightning bugs, and James and Alina talked with some of the other young people from town. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Catherine said softly. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "When I was planning to marry Harold Finch, I was not looking for love. I was looking for security, for a place to belong. I thought that was all I could hope for." She turned to face him. "But you gave me so much more. You gave me a real partnership, real love. A family and a home and a life full of meaning. You gave me everything I did not even know to hope for." Ethan cupped her face gently. "You gave me the same. Before you, I was just existing, working, surviving. You made me want to build something lasting. You made me want to be worthy of your trust. You made me understand what it means to truly love someone." They kissed again, softly this time, a reaffirmation of all the years and all the promises between them. As the stars began to appear overhead and their children's voices floated across the darkening yard, Catherine thought about the long road that had brought them here. 20 years of marriage, 6 children, countless challenges overcome, countless joys shared. A life built from courage and hope and stubborn determination. She had been refused at the chapel, rejected and humiliated. But a cowboy in the back pew had stood up for her, had offered her a chance when she had none. And from that single act of courage and kindness, an entire life had flowered. A love story for the ages, born from desperation, and grown into something beautiful and lasting. A partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. A family that filled her heart to overflowing. Catherine truly had traveled 2,000 miles to Fort Bowie, Arizona Territory in 1873, expecting to marry a man she had never met. Instead, she had found something far more precious. She had found a true partner, a deep and abiding love, and a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. And it had all started with those simple words. "I will stand with her." Words that had changed everything. Words that had led to 20 years of happiness and would lead to many more. Words that had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. As Catherine stood in her husband's arms, surrounded by her children, looking out at the land they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her home, her family, her purpose. She had found love in its truest, deepest form. And she would carry that love with her for all the days that remained to her, grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had stood up when she needed him most, and had never stopped standing beside her in all the years since.